Oh, you live. Hey, all right. Let's do this. Hey, everybody. Oh my gosh. It is a great day for a live stream to talk about JuJutsu Kaisen and Slam Dunk. Yes. So, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're finally at the end of JuJutsu Kaisen. Hello. Yes, hello, Anita. Awesome. I can't believe we're at the end of JuJutsu Kaisen. It's weird. It's very strange. I finished recording this series actually a couple months ago, my reactions, and then it was just week to week. So it's finally at the end. I'm like, man. So if you notice that my hair looks totally different in all the reactions, I'm like, that's why. So want to talk about JuJutsu Kaisen and Slam Dunk today. I know there's probably not going to be a lot of people on here that have been following me. I've been reading Slam Dunk and watching the anime over the past several months on Patreon and through Vimeo. And I can't put it here on YouTube because I originally had another channel here on YouTube. And the whole reason it was taken down was because Shueisha shut down my Slam Dunk reactions. And ever since then, I've been very, very paranoid about lots of things with uploading on here. And so I decided that Inoue's material, it's just going to stay on Patreon and Vimeo. That's just sadly how it has to be because I'm so terrified that they're going to try to take it down again. So if you go on my Vimeo and Patreon, you'll see those reactions to Slam Dunk, the manga and the anime. But I finished that series and now I finished JuJutsu Kaisen. So I want to talk about them together. And surprisingly, they work really well together as a contrast. It's kind of weird. But yeah, so I'm excited to talk with y'all. It's mainly going to be JuJutsu Kaisen, but I realize there's some of you that may have read or watched Slam Dunk, and so I want to talk about that series too with you all, just kind of interspersed. But it's mainly going to be JuJutsu Kaisen, and I want to go ahead and thank. It's in the description of the chat, but I want to go ahead and thank Diginostar, Anita Mayer, Wushin Sweebian, and Salamandra. You four, thank you. You guys gave me some awesome topics to talk about because this series, I was a little worried about this live stream because I was like, man, I'm going to stay anime only with JuJutsu Kaisen. I'm staying anime only, which is going to be hard, really hard. And I was like, what am I going to talk about with just the anime? And then you guys gave me some topics to talk about. And I was like, man, we actually have a lot to talk about. So that's really exciting. So yeah, we're done. JuJutsu Kaisen, we're done till the movie and season 2, which is gonna happen. It's just gonna. So we're gonna talk about that at the end of this, but I've got lots of topics to talk about. But first of all, hello. Hey, how's it going? Glad you guys joined me to talk about this series. I'm really excited to kind of look over here in the chat and see you guys talking. I will say this first and foremost. Y'all can spoil me on Slam Dunk all you want because I've read the manga. I've watched the anime at this point. Spoilers abound with Slam Dunk, but there's a big but. I'm going to ask y'all to self-moderate in this chat because I am staying anime only with JuJutsu Kaisen. It's going to be the hardest thing I think I may have ever done, but that's what I'm going to do because I'll be honest. I'm reacting to My Hero Academia right now, and I've reacted to Ruby and Haikyuu. And with those series, I've read Haikyuu, the manga, all the way through. I'm keeping up with Ruby. And with My Hero Academia, I'm currently reading the manga for it, right? Every week I read the manga on Viz. I have a Viz subscription. So every week I'll read One Piece and My Hero Academia, those two manga series. And it is so hard, y'all. It is so hard because the past couple months, I have been getting on Viz every Sunday. I'll pull up My Hero Academia. I'll pull up One Piece. I'll read those chapters. And out there in the corner, there's that little box that says JuJutsu Kaisen. And I'm like, nope, don't do it. I'm like, don't do it, Romania. Don't you do it. And it's so hard. But so, yeah, I'm glad some of you on here are anime only as well. That makes me feel better because I feel like I'm on Twitter probably more than anything social media wise. And so it's really been hard on Twitter to talk about JuJutsu Kaisen. And then, yes, self-moderating is very hard. And it's been very difficult because I like to see fan art on Twitter and I've had to mute threads about JuJutsu Kaisen because I don't want to be spoiled. And there's one aspect I've been spoiled about, and I will tell you all on here in a minute. There's one aspect I've been spoiled about, and now I'm like, dang it, I'm so hyped, but I don't want to research it anymore because I don't want to know anymore. So it's going to be hard, but I think there's plenty of other series to focus on that I'm not going to have to worry about it. Yeah, and Tamiya, yeah, it's so popular that it's going to be hard. I feel like, yeah, and we're going to talk about this at the end of the live stream. It's going to be hard for this and the series that's replacing JuJutsu Kaisen. It's going to be hard, but we're going to talk about that later. But anyway, so I've got lots of topics, and I've got my sheet here of all my notes of discussion things. So lots of stuff to talk about. So we're 5 minutes into this. Let's just dive in, shall we? And I'm going to be looking over here at the chat too. Yeah, Pinterest. I'm not even going to get on Pinterest because there's no point. That will spoil me more than anything. But yeah, so what I like about talking about Slam Dunk and JuJutsu Kaisen together is that you're dealing with two anime that are basically 30 years apart. So Slam Dunk, if you don't know, is a basketball anime that came out in the early 1990s. And then obviously JuJutsu Kaisen just came out recently in the last couple of years and was adapted this year to an anime. What I love about these two series is that they are both examples of anime and manga in their genre done well. They're both done well. Slam Dunk, for all of the 90s tropes and all of the 90s stereotypes that it does have, it does sports anime and sports manga extremely well. Like, I really, really like it in terms of being a sports anime and sports manga. And JuJutsu Kaisen, I could gush all day about how it is by far one of the best modern shonen that I have watched. And I absolutely love what Akutami is doing with this series in terms of subverting shonen tropes that have become so commonplace. And I would say that Slam Dunk, being 30 years old, it deserves a remake. Absolutely. If you've not read the manga, it's amazing. But it deserves a remake. We had Hunter x Hunter get a remake in 2011, and the original came out in 1997. Slam Dunk, it's been 30 years. You could do a remake. Uchida, that voices Fushiguro, he could be Rukawa. There's so many similarities between those characters. And there's actually a lot of similarities between Sakuragi and Rukawa in Slam Dunk and Yuji and Fushiguro in JuJutsu Kaisen. It's really interesting. So, but I would say a modern equivalent, obviously, that gets compared a lot to Slam Dunk is Haikyuu. And I know people got annoyed during my Slam Dunk reactions because they'd be like, quit comparing it to Haikyuu. And I'm like, you can't avoid it. I will say, Furudate, I love Haikyuu. I have many of the manga volumes. I will rave about Haikyuu all day, but Furudate took a big page from Slam Dunk. There are so many parallels and comparisons between those two series that it's really unavoidable. Like, you can't not compare the two. And so, but I feel like Haikyuu is a spiritual successor to Slam Dunk because a lot of the things that Slam Dunk isn't able to do, like I love Slam Dunk, but the character development could be more thorough, I think. And I think Haikyuu becomes more character focused and obviously talks about volleyball to an incredible extent, but becomes more character focused. Whereas Slam Dunk is more focused on Sakuragi and a few characters and then the basketball and all that. So it's a nice spiritual successor, I think, to that series. Whereas JuJutsu Kaisen is arguably, everybody says JuJutsu Kaisen is the spiritual successor to Bleach. And yes, I'd say it's also kind of the trio trope. It's kind of like a spiritual successor to Naruto as well. One day, far in the future, when I have time to record my 3-hour rant about Bleach, I will probably use JuJutsu Kaisen as a comparison. Because I was a huge Bleach fan. Like, y'all can't see on that bookshelf back there, but there's like 50 volumes of Bleach there. And I'll pull them out one day and show you all. And yeah, the 90s was 30 years ago. Doesn't make sense, right? We're very weird. But yeah, one day I will rant about Bleach to a large extent. And when I do, I will use JuJutsu Kaisen as a comparison, because there's so much that I loved about Bleach, but there's also so much looking back that I'm like, man, JuJutsu Kaisen subverted a lot of those tropes that Bleach had and made them so much better. Like, so much better. Like, it's JuJutsu Kaisen as a shonen. It's still a shonen. Like, there's still the protagonist that has the special catch that makes them a little bit different than everybody else. Like Yuji being naturally athletic, having the natural capabilities to house Sukuna. which I can finally say his name right. And then all of that, like there's those tropes, and then you have the token girl character in the trio, but things are so much more progressive and modernized that Akutami, I have to give him props, because it's like you took something that's so commonplace, especially in terms of female characters, which we'll talk about. As a woman reading this shonen series that's targeted towards male audiences, there's so much that I love that he's doing with this series that's very progressive, but still not, it's not like he's not screaming like, look how progressive I am with this series at all. And that's amazing, because sometimes I think with an author, they can be like, oh, look at how modern this thing is. And it doesn't feel natural. But with JuJutsu Kaisen, it's just part of the story. Like no one's coming out and saying like, she's a strong female character. She just is. And that's really, really cool. So yeah, there's a big comparison to Bleach with JuJutsu Kaisen, but I think that JuJutsu Kaisen is just on its own a good shonen. And it's probably my favorite so far that's come out. Like I've watched Demon Slayer and it's fine. It's good. But I think this is, I like JuJutsu Kaisen more, to be honest. And I think a lot of people, as the series is going on, which Demon Slayer's ended. So it'll be interesting to look at both series as a whole and see how they compare. So yeah, let's talk about female characters. Let's talk about them. And I'm going to be looking at the chat to see you guys, if you have anything to chime in as well. But oh my gosh. So real quickly, I want to just go over, in Slam Dunk, there's not a lot of female characters. There's just not. It's a very typical 90s shonen. It is mostly dudes. There are 3 main female characters in Slam Dunk, and I will argue that they are good representations of the tropes that they portray. So you have Haruko, which is the sister of Akagi, the love interest. You have Hikuichi's sister, who's a reporter, and you have Ayako, who's the manager, of the stereotypical female manager in Slam Dunk. And what I like about those tropes is that they are done well. Like Haruko, despite her being like the starry-eyed love interest in Slam Dunk, she has played basketball before. She helps our main character develop skills as a basketball player. She's supportive. She's kind. She's just a nice character. She compares a lot to Ochako in My Hero Academia, where she's kind of like a support character, but isn't. So I like Haruko in that series. And then with Hikuichi's sister, she's like the reporter, the go-to, working woman in the 90s anime. And she's frequent throughout the series, like interviewing characters and getting information, and is kind of like a narrator for us in the series. And then Ayako is that female manager character who's just really strong-willed and doesn't take any crap from any of the guys, and all the guys respect her, which I really, really like. Like we had in Haikyuu, they have the female manager for Terushima team, obviously Jozenji, and she kind of compares to that. She's not quite like Shimizu for Karasuno, but she's a really good character as well. So I think that the tropes of female characters in Slam Dunk, as minuscule as they are, they're done well. They're not overly sexualized. They're not overly like played up as jokes or played as weak. They're just really good, strong characters. But then you have JuJutsu Kaisen. And it's so refreshing. Like I said, as a woman reading a shonen, it's so refreshing to have every female character is just good. They're just strong and unique and fleshed out and complex, and they are every bit equal to the male counterparts in the series. And I love that. And the thing of it is that Akutami doesn't draw attention to it. They're just there. It's like every character is just a character in a series. They're not token. They're not weaker than the others. Queen Maki slay. Yes, indeed. Maki is the first person. Maki and Nobara are the first 2 I have on here to talk about. Oh my God. So, okay, Nobara. If y'all have seen the season finale that premiered yesterday, which I'm sure y'all have, I cannot express how much I love Nobara's character. And I didn't know if I would like her at first, because when she's first introduced way back in episode 3, I was a little concerned, because going in, I felt like Bleach and other shonen that she was going to be this like love interest character, and she wasn't going to have, she was going to be the love interest. She was going to be put to the sidelines. She wasn't going to get to do anything. She'd have like a healing power because a lot of times in shonen, the female characters are given a healing power, and that's what they do. They just sit there and heal the main character. And it's like, It's cool. I would have a healing power if I was in one of these series because I'd want to heal myself. Yes, please. I would be Orihime. Absolutely. But I love that Nobara doesn't have that. Oh, we'll talk about shipping and the romance in this series, Zena. But yeah, I love that Nobara doesn't have that. She has a kick-ass power with a hammer and nail, and she's like, I'm just going to go to town on these curses, and y'all are going to have to deal with me. And I love the conversation between her and Momo. I finally got that character's name right. I love the conversation between Nobara and Momo, where Momo is very indoctrinated into this specific ideal of what we think going into this shonen. We think that female characters have to represent. She's like, you have to be cute. You have to do twice as much work. You have to do all this other stuff. And Nobara's like, no, we don't. Like, I can be cute and also be badass. Like, I'll just be whatever I want and they'll just have to deal with it. And I love that mentality. I love that Nobara and Yuji just share a brain cell. They're both like so ridiculous. And I absolutely love it. They're so protective of Fushiguro. Hello, all of you entering the chat. Yeah, so we're talking about Nobara and female characters in JuJutsu Kaisen supremacy. We're just getting that out of the way now because it needs to be talked about. And I love that Nobara is fleshed out as a character as much as our other two of the trio. Like with Yuji, Fushiguro, and Nobara, I feel like we've gotten a pretty equal amount of lore and backstory on them at this point. Yeah, and I like that each of them they all are very compatible in a lot of ways. And they all kind of bounce off of each other in strong ways too. And I like that throughout this season, I like that Yuji went off on his own and had his own arc with Junpei and everything. I love that he did that because it allowed Fushiguro and Nobara to connect and become closer. And then them all kind of coming back and reuniting together. I think it made for a much better dynamic. So then, yeah, Nobara supremacy, her in the last episode. And I talked about this in the reaction. I love that moment that Yuji has her over his shoulder, and in any other anime, in any other shonen, she'd be like, oh, save me, Yuji. And no, she's like, I got your back. I'm going to do this. And it's like, oh, so refreshing. I freaking love it. Yeah, the last episode, she was beautiful and badass, and I just absolutely love it. And we'll talk about the philosophies of these characters too, and the dynamics. Then you have Maki and Mai. And it's like Queen Maki, like just, I love the idea of relationships in terms of family in this series, because we've gotten established that there's clans, there's the 4 main clans, and that Fushiguro and Maki and Mai are related. And it's not ever, it doesn't seem generic or campy in any way. Like, you know, in some anime, when you find out the characters are related, there's suddenly all these little, like, I don't know, it just gets to be like, they kind of go off and do their own thing as a family. And Maki and Mai are just like, oh yeah, Fushiguro's like our cousin or something. I don't know. But Maki, so badass. I love the idea of her using the weapons, that she can't see spirits without her glasses. And that becomes like a point of strength with her and Mai. I didn't like Mai at first at all. Did not like that. Oh, we're going to discuss Snarksadoodle, the chair metaphor. We're going to discuss that. Don't you worry. But I feel like with Mai, I didn't like her at first at all. I thought she was the naggy character that you'd see in a shonen. Like a lot of times, strong female characters gets interpreted to bitchy female characters or naggy female characters. And at first, Mai was like that. And I was like, oh, you're going to be the stereotype. We're going to make you the stereotypical female strong character. But then you find out she's not. She really has a reason for why she is the way that she is. And it's tied to Maki and their fates kind of being commingled together. So I really like that. I like that Akutami took something that could have been a stereotype and still put it on its head and made it something more fleshed out and complex. I really like that. That's the one thing too, Tamiya, that you're mentioning in the chat. I've not read the manga at all. And so I feel like going back and seeing some of these panels in the manga would be really, really cool. And I've seen a couple manga panels where everything looks kind of sketchy. And I feel like Mappa has done a really good job animating and adapting that style to anime. Yeah, Urahime, she's another one here. I love Urahime. We're going to talk about Gojo. Don't you worry. We're going to talk about Gojo. I have thoughts about Gojo, and we're going to talk about those. But I love that Urahime, she doesn't put up with him at all, and she kind of hates him. She can't. She's the representation of the faction of the fandom that doesn't like Gojo or thinks he's just creepy or weird. And she's just like, she doesn't put up with him at all. She's like, yeah, Kay, cool. Thanks, Gojo, about that. Like, she just doesn't, he likes to troll her, and she just does not put up with it at all. She's like, no, thank you. But I really like her. Her little overall look there at the last part of the series was really good. May. As far as character designs for female characters, May's may be my favorite out of all of them in this series, because I like the braid over May's hair. I like that she's in the black, like, witch's garb. It's very similar to Momo. And I like that she can communicate with animals and control them. Like that scene in the OP where all the crows are flying around her is so beautiful. And Zena, you talk about Gojo. We'll talk about Gojo. But yeah, May, I love it. And I love that laugh she has at the end where Gojo gives her all the money, and she's just like, rah! I feel like May is Kyoto's equivalent of Nanami. Like, May is the Nanami equivalent for their school, because it's kind of like the parallel where Nanami was just doing the salaryman job for money to not be a jujutsu sorcerer. And May is kind of doing things within the jujutsu sorcerer realm just for money. But I mean, they have different personalities and different morals, but they're kind of bouncing off of each other. They're kind of contrasting. And I really like that between them. And then Momo, it took me forever to get Momo's name right, because I thought she just looked like the naggy witch at the beginning of Kiki's Delivery Service with her giant gravity-defying pigtails. But Momo's character, I think, is an interesting kind of reflection of what we normally would think of with shonen female characters. And she's kind of that reflection and that talking piece. And even then, she still goes beyond that, but I feel like she's a good representation of that we can see these other female characters kind of subvert or go beyond that as well. Yeah. And then Adam's monster. Oh God, your username. Oh my. Yeah, it's hard to hate a lot of characters in this series. I mean, there's one character I do not like in this series, and we'll get to that for reasons. But yeah, it's hard to hate a lot of these characters because they're so fleshed out and developed, and you know their motivations and their morals, and that's really, really cool. I think it's neat to see them kind of interact with one another and their dynamics bouncing off and their morals bouncing off one another as well. And then there's Miwa. I can't forget Miwa. If I was a character, Snarksadoodle, you're on to me. You know. Miwa, getting back to the female characters, Miwa, I think if I was a character in this series, I would probably be her. I think personality-wise, her and I are probably the most similar. Because Miwa is just so sweet and so dutiful, but also kind of like quirky and bubbly, and just like really optimistic. And that's kind of how I feel in real life. And so and kind of dorky. And so I absolutely love Miwa. And also the costume designs of these female characters. I absolutely love that they are not, again, going back to Bleach, they are not overtly sexualized costumes. Like, none of them are. They're all wearing just normal clothes. Like, Miwa's in a suit, and I love that. I kind of love that kind of gender norm breaking where she's just wearing like a guy's suit, and it's fine. Like, if this were Bleach or Seven Deadly Sins or something else that's a shonen, they'd be wearing like half clad and half nude the whole time, and it'd be like, cool, thanks. Thanks, I hate it. It would be like that sort of thing. And I like that they don't do that in this series. They all just make them just normal characters like the guys. Like, you don't see, well, we'll talk about the guy characters. You don't see them like walking around half nude for the most part. But yeah, I love that. And then finally, the last woman would be the woman that Toto admires, the woman that gave him the woman that gave him the impression of what type of woman is your type, the tall woman with the big ass, like that woman. I don't know her name yet. I think it's Yuki. I think somebody in passing has said that's Yuki in one of the comments. Again, I'm not a manga reader, so I know no manga spoilers. But yeah, she's awesome. She's badass already. I can't wait to see more of her in season 2 because I know she's going to come back, I'm sure. You don't just introduce a character like that with that big of significance, especially to somebody like Toto, and then say, oh yeah, we're never showing them again. It's like, okay, sure. Adam. Yeah. Being a teacher, honestly, it's hilarious because in real life, I am the worst person at remembering people's names. The worst. I remember faces really well and what people look like. But if you ask me to say their name, I'm like, but then when it comes to like anime or a book, I'm like, yeah, that character and that character. And people are like, how does that work? And it's like, that's just how my brain functions. So my brain just got too many anime character names, has no place for real people names left. But yeah, as far as dynamics go with these characters, obviously, just to touch back on Slam Dunk real quickly, I feel like in comparison to JuJutsu Kaisen, what I would probably improve the most on if I were to remake Slam Dunk, which obviously you're not going to change anything from the manga because you want to keep it all as close to what the mangaka originally intended. But I feel like the characters, they get introduced in Slam Dunk and you get a feel for them, but there's never that backstory with each character, with the exception of Mitsui. There's never that backstory that you really can feed on and connect to the characters like you can with JuJutsu Kaisen. Like, even though the characters in JuJutsu Kaisen, we don't have a full backstory to, I think, any of them, we've gotten enough pieces that you can really connect to those characters and relate to them, which I really, really like. I mean, obviously in Slam Dunk, if you have to start on Slam Dunk, I will say that the first couple volumes, it took me a while to get into it. And then volume 7 and 8, where we get the character Mitsui and his backstory, amazing. I cried. I cried reading volume 8 of Slam Dunk just because it was so touching. And then comparing characters, okay, walking around half nude, Toto. Yes, obviously, he's our representation of that, which is fitting because he's the one that's kind of like sexualizing the characters, like what woman and what person is your type. Makes sense. I feel like there's a connection and a parallel between like Rukawa and Sakuragi in Slam Dunk and Yuji and Fushiguro in JuJutsu Kaisen, because both Rukawa and Fushiguro are kind of like the prodigy characters. They have talents that aren't fully explored or fully tapped into yet. And then Yuji and Sakuragi are kind of like the delinquentish characters, which we'll talk about that. They're kind of on the surface seem like the delinquent characters that are our main protagonists that have a special ability that lets them kind of excel and be a part of the story. So like with Sakuragi, it's his ability to rebound and to jump and his natural athleticism, and Yuji's kind of natural athleticism. But I like that Akutami flips the script because unlike Slam Dunk, Yuji is not a delinquent. Yuji is not a delinquent. He's part of the occult club. He's in a dorky horror, ghost hunting club, and he's just naturally athletic. So it's kind of a subversion of what you think of, like even with series like Bleach and Naruto, with Naruto was a delinquent. Like, he was the troublemaker. And then in Bleach, Ichigo wasn't technically a delinquent, but he was kind of like in the same boat. Like, he would get into fights and get into trouble at the start of the series. And people were kind of like, stay away from the orange-haired kid. And with Yuji, he's not really a delinquent. He's really compassionate and kind-hearted. And he has a lot of empathy for people. And his whole dynamic of wanting to save as many people as he can from the start of the series, like that really, it set him apart as a protagonist. It was similar to Tanjiro in Demon Slayer. And I like this trend. I like this trend of these characters, these main protagonists. I like the trend of them being compassionate, well-rounded, ideal characters and not just being bullies or, delinquents. I like that we're getting into a trend of more fleshed out dynamic main characters. I like that a lot. And then Fushiguro is surprisingly the delinquent. He's the delinquent in all this. He's the one that's had the jaded past that is now like trying to mend his former ways. Like that was such a surprise in episode like 22 when we found out Fushiguro's backstory. It was like, oh, he's the delinquent. And that parallel is not lost on me of Fushiguro standing atop the bodies of the kids he's beaten up and Sukuna standing atop the corpses. That parallel is not lost. We're going to talk about that. Yeah. So looking at the chat here. Yes, Sukuna has a tendency to rip clothes. Sukuna is our sexualized character, which is kind of odd because he's in Yuji's body. And it's like, what do we do with this? But yeah, as far as character dynamics, how real they feel. And that was something that was brought up as a discussion point. These characters feel so fleshed out and real They have flaws. Every character in the show has a flaw. They're not perfect presented characters. They all have trials and tribulations that they're going through, but that makes us relate to them more, and it makes them more compelling characters because you want to see them work through that and get stronger. And it's something that we all can relate to as, human beings. So I really, really like that. The ideals, I find it most interesting that, the topic of life and death. And this relates to, I said in the reaction of, I think, episode 23, Fushiguro and Junpei are really similar in their philosophies and how they view society. Like Fushiguro obviously has, at the beginning of the flashback with his backstory, a very negative view of humanity because his father left him, because Gojo had this conversation with him about the Zenin clan just using him as, a means to an end of becoming the clan leader. And just because of how he views people and has a very jaded perception of humanity, very similar to Junpei for obvious reasons. The difference is Junpei did not have a Gojo. Junpei did not have Yuji until the very end to kind of show him other advice and other means of how society can be. Whereas Gojo had his sister, or not Gojo, Fushiguro had his sister. He had Gojo. He had other people that he could look at as kind of examples of humanity being good. And then obviously he meets Yuji, and it's another further example of that. So I think that's really interesting. But I really liked in this series the kind of conflicting views of killing and saving that Fushiguro and Yuji had. So Yuji coming at this series being like, I'm going to save everybody and I'm not going to kill anyone. And then as he continues to be a jujitsu sorcerer, realizes, I don't know if I can do that. That's not going to work out. And Fushiguro kind of coming from, I'm going to save whoever I want to. And that ties to Nobara and the whole chair metaphor. Nobara, I loved that at the end of the last episode where Nobara's like, I have so many seats and I'm going to take care of my people. I'm going to take care of the people that are filling those chairs around me. And if I can't save the other people, I'm going to be sad about it. But the main thing is that I protect the people I'm closest to. And those are who I need to focus on. And I like that Yuji's kind of like, Yuji just wiggles his chair into the circle. And he's like, I'm in your circle now too, whether you like it or not. And she's like, yeah, that's kind of the case. You're now part of my circle and I'm going to protect you. And I thought the conversation at the end of episode 24 was really, really interesting. A lot of people were like confused about that conversation between Nobara and Fushiguro and then Yuji and Sukuna. And I think my interpretation of it is that Fushiguro realized that the whole thing with this curse coming after his sister and these other people, like it wasn't just coincidence that it started happening recently. It started happening around the time that Yuji ate the first Sukuna finger and Sukuna became part of him as a vessel. And so Fushiguro's connected the dots and been like, this whole series of events, everything in this series coming to a head now is kind of because of what Yuji did in eating the finger. And my interpretation of that conversation was he was telling Nobara, he's like, look, we don't need to add more guilt to Yuji. We don't need to make him feel any guiltier about this. So let's just not talk about that with him. Because Yuji kind of tells Nobara, he's like, I realized when Eso and Kizuchu died, he's like, I realized they were one, not just curses. They were humans that had been turned into curses through the death paintings. But they don't know about the death paintings. But also they had a connection and they felt for one another. And I think that Yuji killing them, when he said, I'm sorry, he realized in that moment that they had a connection with each other. And he's like, this is different than when I killed those curses that Mojito sent to me. He's like, this is different. And so he's like, and you could tell Yuji felt that guilt. And so Fushiguro's like, we don't need to make it worse. And then they don't realize that while they're trying to plot and be nice to Yuji, Sukuna's over here on the side of his cheek, just totally berating him. And twisting the knife in deeper, like while they're sitting there trying to be good friends and being like, let's not make Yuji feel any worse. Meanwhile, Sukuna over here being the king of curses is like, here's all the things you've done wrong. And here's all the people that have died because of you. And now what are you going to do? And Azuna, exactly. Yuji ate the finger to save Megumi. And now Fushiguro feels guilty about that. So that last episode, that just the shades of guilt there and regret And I think that ties back to the whole thing with Jujutsu Sorcerers, where Gojo's like, all Jujutsu Sorcerers feel regret. And you transform that fear and energy into something to use. And it's like, ugh. And I love that that's the end. And Yuji wanting to protect Fushiguro is like, don't you dare say any of this around him. Like, you keep this conversation between us. Like, Yuji's like, I'll handle it. I'll shoulder whatever you throw at me, but don't you have this conversation around him. I found it interesting, and a lot of people were commenting that Sukuna is kind of absent from this series, from this season so far. You know, when we had Sukuna first appear in episode 1, ripping the clothes off, and you were like, okay, Yuji's been possessed by this curse king. Cool. And then in episodes 4 and 5, you know, he takes over Yuji's body. He fights Fushiguro. He has this big moment where he talks to Fushiguro, and then he just kind of disappears for the rest of the season. And there was, I think, Natalie, one of the commenters on YouTube, she kept being like, when is Sukuna going to come back? And I was like, I don't know. He comes back periodically, but it's just, I mean, obviously when Mahito tried to invade Yuji and warp his soul, Sukuna was like, nah, bitch, we ain't doing that. And like kicked him back. But yeah, I kept thinking that Sukuna was going to appear more, and I'm kind of conflicted about it, because on the one hand, I wanted to see Sukuna. On the one hand, Sukuna is so intriguing. The mystery of him is so intriguing, and we're given little crumbs of lore from Gojo and Nanami, little crumbs of lore about him that make us hungry to know more about his character. But on the flip side, I also like that this was mainly Yuji's journey. Yuji has to become stronger through Yuji. Like, it's not through Sukuna. He can't rely on Sukuna. And as painful as it was, as daunting and painful as that moment was when he asked Sukuna to heal Junpei, and Sukuna was like, nah. It was heartbreaking, and I hated it. But I was like, man, that whole dynamic totally flipped the script on what I thought was going to happen. So yeah, we're going to get back to Sukuna and Fushiguro here in a second, but I wanted to briefly say that the whole episode 12, the whole Junpei storyline and how it got resolved, I don't know about you all, but I did not see that coming. That has probably been one of the biggest surprises other than the death paintings and the camo connection. Other than that, that's been one of the biggest surprises this series, because the OP, everything, like, you just think it's going to go the way a shonen normally does. You just think like, oh, well, Junpei is going down this dark path, but it's okay. I fully expected Junpei to be a mole. I thought that Junpei was going to be a mole, that Mahito and Geto were going to have Junpei invade the Jujutsu Kaisen school. I thought he was going to invade the school. I thought he was going to like go in there and find information about the fingers, about Gojo, and report back to Mahito and Geto. And there was going to be this big battle at the end. And Junpei was going to there was going to be like talk no jutsu, and like Nakama was going to win through at the end, Nakama. And Junpei was going to be like, no, I am a Jujutsu sorcerer. And then Akutami was like, nope, you aren't getting that. Like, you think that that's what's going to happen, but I'm not afraid to kill characters, and here's the first one to go down. And it's like, oh. And the thing of it is, yeah, Junpei. The thing of it is that as heartbreaking as that death was, and as much as I hate that Junpei died, and it made me hate Mahito so much, it was almost necessary for the plot for Yuji to go through something like that, because Yuji, like you said, Tamiya, we're familiar with the villain and what's happened. And so we think that Junpei is going to just, it's going to be all right. And it doesn't. But it was important for Yuji to experience that because it helped his character growth so, so much. So as much as I hated that moment, the impact was just so good in this season. Like, it's just so good. And I'm glad that he wasn't brought back. I'm glad that he's technically dead. I'm glad, because that's just, as awful as that is to say, as a character, it has so much more impact. Like, I'm not a fan of the trope where a character dies and then they suddenly come back like 3 seasons later. I'm like, what are we doing? Like, unless there's a really good explanation behind it, or unless it really ties in the story, I'm not a fan of that trope. It feels very fan servicey. And so I'm glad that that Junpei's death had that emotional impact and that it seems like it's permanent. I don't know. I've not read the manga. Don't spoil me. But it just, yeah, I think that was really, really good. So then, yeah, other characters in connection. Can we talk about Toto? Can we talk about Toto? Because again, like when Toto was introduced in episode 8, I did not like Toto's character. The whole, like, what type of person is your type? He was like the big brutish jock character that I was like, oh man, you're going to be like this big brawny character and you're just going to beat people up. Like, at first I did not like Toto. And then I don't know what happened, but episode 17 came along and suddenly you get my brother. Yes, you get like Toto becomes the most endearing character in this whole damn show. Like, what the heck? Like, the bromance. And here's the thing, and we'll talk about this. I'm going to go ahead and bring this up now. It's on my sheet. But shipping with this show, I like that this is like the most platonic shonen ever. It's the most like, and it's not trying to be platonic. It's just like there's so much going on. We don't have time for romance in this show. We got shit to do. And so the bromance between Yuji and Toto is an authentic, straight up bromance. It is a bromance. There is nothing romantic or sexual between Yuji and Toto in my eyes. It is a strict bromance, best friendo, braza. Like, it is the best bromance I've ever seen in a shonen because it's so authentic and real. And you just feel like, did we just become best friends? Yes. And yeah, it's too tragic for romance. There's so much tragedy that it's like, no, it's the most wholesome relationship. Now, if I'm going to ship anybody in this show, it's Maki and Nobara. Like, that Akutami, that's like the most pushed agenda I've seen so far, is the Maki Nobara agenda, because they're just like, Nobara's like so hung up on Maki and it's very apparent, and Maki's just kind of like, yeah, let's go with it. If I was going to ship any male characters, it'd probably be either, and this is the weirdest thing in the world to me, it would either be Fushiguro and Yuji or Fushiguro and Sukuna for weird reasons. I'm like, why? I don't know why. When characters complain about, when people in the fandoms complain about, oh, that character's so much older, I've noticed on Twitter, there's a huge Sukuna Megumi agenda. And I'm like, Sukuna's thousands of years old. Like, what are we doing? Why? But yeah, Toto and Yuji, that bromance, oh my God. Like, it's just there. And I love it. And I also love that, here's the thing, in episode 21, Fushiguro and Nobara, they don't really know how to deal with Toto. Toto just kind of pops in to bug Yuji and being like, hey, best friend. And they're both like, what? And it's kind of cool because it shows Yuji, you know, in other series, the main character would be stuck with these two friends and two friends only. Like, he'd just stick around with Nobara and Fushiguro. And it's cool that he has that relationship, but he also has friendships with Toto. He has relationships with Nanami that are totally separate from, you know, the others. Like, we don't see Nanami and Yuji interact in the same place as Fushiguro and Nobara. They kind of do their own thing and whatever. So I really like that. There's not really any shipping I do in this series other than, I mean, Nobara and Maki, I see it. I'm like, cool. But I don't think we have enough material yet to ship anybody else with anybody else. So yeah, I definitely, I'm not totally on board with the Sukuna Fushiguro agenda because I'm like, that's so weird to me. And they've never fully really interacted. Sukuna's just done the creepy Edward thing from Twilight where he's been watching Fushiguro. Like it's so bizarre. But yeah, the friendship between Yuji and Fushiguro, Yuji and Nobara, and Toto and Yuji is so cool. And I love that. I just wait for season 2, ships will sail. See, that's what this show's done. It's just built us up with the story and these characters. And then when we get to season 2, then we'll have the shipping stuff come in. That's fine. I'm fine with that. I really like, though, that Nobara did not become the love interest for either Yuji or Fushiguro because she's not. No. I like in episode 3, right from the get-go, Nobara looked at Yuji and was like, God, he's a potato. And at that moment, I was like, yes, good job. glad we've got that out of the way. That the author, the mangaka, right from the start was like, no, she's not going to be in a relationship with either of these two mains. Don't worry. And it's like, cool. Glad we've got that out of the way. And then the connection between Kyoto and the Tokyo schools, just to touch base on the other characters. Panda. I'm watching Semblance of Sanity's reactions to JuJutsu Kaisen now. And oh my God. Panda, I love that they're already on board with his character. I was so glad we got that explained kind of right off the bat. Because I was like, if I have to go this entire show not knowing what Panda is, I'm going to be like, what the heck? And I'm glad that the whole curse doll thing, that makes so much sense. I'm glad we got that out of the way. That's wonderful. Also, Maki and Mai, their relationship, like I said, with Fushiguro, I find it interesting that they're just kind of like, yeah, we're family, distantly, cool. It's a lot of, yes, I do watch Semblance of Sanity. Is like, I've watched them for years and they're pretty much the only reactor. I watched some other Ruby reactors and the stuff that they do, but Semblance of Sanity is like the only main reactor that I really watch. Xiao Long's another one that I watch, and they're pretty much the only ones I have time to get into.